All right, so it's 2 o'clock, and we'll start with just a brief pause as usual. And I'll begin by acknowledging the Wadi Wadi people, the traditional custodians of the beautiful Illawarra country where Nantian Institute resides. And also just to honor all of the living beings of the past, the present, and the future who live in respect of our interdependence with each other, with the countries where we live and with the communities that we live in. And so welcome everyone. I'm Elizabeth McDougall. I'm a lecturer in Buddhist studies here at Nantian Institute. And I'm extremely happy to welcome you today to what is our first student-led NTI conversation. And our students today, we've got Jacob and Gabriela Guerrero Alonso, who are going to be in dialogue with our keynote speaker, Brother Tenzin. And so I'd encourage you in your view settings to put on multi-speaker or speaker view. And I'll just briefly introduce our speakers. Tenzin, who is also Dr. Alex Anderson, who is an Australian Buddhist monk and an ecologist who specializes in climate change impacts on biodiversity, deep ecology, and environmental activism. And he's usually based at Gaia Forest, which is a remaining rainforest up near Dorrigo in mid-central New South Wales. And Brother Tenzin works at the intersection of environmental and human spiritual conservation, applying mindfulness harmony with oneself, community, and the natural world. And our Nantian Institute student Jacob Tan is a formal healthcare worker in marginalized communities and a Buddhist Chan philosopher who sees Mother Nature as a great teacher. And Jacob is an avid traveler and backpacker across cultures. He has seen the impacts of extractivism of many landscapes and communities. Jacob believes that the climate crisis is a spiritual crisis, and that recognizing the interconnected nature of all life should be humanity's priority. And we've got our NTI student, Gabriela Guerrero Alonso, who is a sociologist and environmental advocate inspired by Buddhists, whose work explores the intersection of equal justice, spirituality, and so experience working alongside indigenous communities and small-scale farmers in Colombia. She continues to work to amplify marginalized voices and foster systemic. Jacob and Gabriela to share some slides and to open the conversation. Those quick notes of housekeeping that what will be a half session, go until in the last 20 minutes to a discussion, And if you have any really pertinent clarifying questions through the conversation, you can raise, and there's raise your hand and we'll make sure that you get a chance to speak. And I'll also look up your question in the chat. Feel free to also type your questions in the chat. All right, welcome, and Jacob and Gabriela and Brother Tenzin, take it away.
Okay, thank you all for being here, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. I am very honored to be invited in this space and share a room with Brother Tenzin and Jacob. So to start this topic in a more easy way and to make it a little bit close to us, I want us to first take a minute and think in the moment that we got out of bed and how extractivism is present in our daily lives. So when we heard the word, we picture vast mines, oil wells, logging into forests in remote corners of the world, maybe not even here. But extractivism is not only out there, it lives in our daily lives, and often unconsciously we participate in it. So for instance, the smartphone that I have, even this computer in which I am ironically talking about this topic, contains mineral extracts under dangerous conditions in places like Congo. So it is not just the environment, it's the people involved in this transactional system. Now, let's take a second to think about our clothes, the clothes we wear. are made of cotton that work with pesticides that deplete soils or that are in synthetic fibers. Even in our morning coffee, connect us to monoculture plantations that replace biodiversity with a single crop, often displacing indigenous communities and degrading ecosystems. That without thinking about the implication in the transportation of sometimes taking, for example, in my case, a good Colombian coffee. That reminds me home. Extractivism then is not just an economic model. It is a cultural logic. It is the belief that the earth is an endless storehouse of human desires and that we can take without limit. As Eduardo Godinez, 2009, reminds us, extractivism is about more than resource extraction. It is a way of relating to nature and to each other on that one that normalizes exploitation, and as well about the power dynamics that lead us to the socio-ecological destruction. That's why, under my perspective, there is where Buddhism becomes essential. Buddhism teaches us to look at the roots of suffering, craving, greed, and ignorance in many ways. So extractivism is greed institutionalized. Its craven scale up to global proportions, and ignorance is present when we do not see the interdependence that ties us to the people and ecosystem that suffer from our consumption. But awareness, it's an open door. That's the good part. When we realize that every product has a story of labor, of land, of water, of energy, we can begin to act differently. We may not escape extractivism entirely as the system itself, but we can soften its impact. We can choose to consume more mindful, to reduce waste, to support communities and ecosystems that respect life. In this sense, everyday life becomes a place of practicing. Eating a meal, buying clothes, or upgrading a phone are not trivial acts. They are ethical encounters. They invite us to ask how much is enough. And I really want us to think how much is enough, how much clothes are enough, how much electronic devices are enough, how much food even is enough. Who or what is harmed by my choices? How can I live with compassion, not only for the other humans, but for rivers, mountains, other animals, and forests? If extractivism is a cultural habit of taking without measure, then Buddhist practice offers us another habit: to pause, to see interdependence, and to act with compassion and metta. Also, I will, like Brother Tenzin, will explore a little bit more about this topic. So this is how we begin to build a future beyond extractivism, not only in policies or protests that as well are important, but to intimate a space of daily life that are as well very deep and important for this. As Venerable Jew said, and I'm quoting her not very precisely to be honest, the most difficult obstacle in ethics is to start when nobody is seeing us. So having this in mind, so this is the concept, the big concept of what is exactly extractivism. And it's like a theoretical concept of activities that remove large volumes of not processed natural resources, especially for export to meet the demand in certain countries. This is a general explanation, but based on what I just, and we just think about as well, I want to quote Eduardo Godinez as well, which is a Norwegian that is alive and a scholar alive, and also activism, that he defines extractivism not only as a mode of appropriating nature, but also a way of organizing the economy, politics, and culture around the intensive exploitation of natural resources. So in this way, we are not talking just about environment, just about what is outside, but even the way in which we treat each other, with our partners, with our other people that are near us, and the environment, of course. So this phenomenon is not just, it's not new. It goes back 500 years ago when the colonization of the Americas, of Africa and Asia, were starting. Like, it was not the definition as we now, or as we in the 70s and 80s with the neoliberal reforms were constructed, but it is essentially extractivism of the ones that are conceived as unequal from us, from our point of view, from the inequality from the relation of power that we put into the system. So in this order of ideas, like in the 1980s, under neoliberalism reforms, privatization, deregulation, and free trade, the extractivist industry became central to so-called development strategies. The reality, however, is that the local communities often benefit the least, while the ecological and social costs are the greatest. So now, some of the countries that had like neo-extractivism, which is another term as well, that had a lot of conflicts and a lot of different points of view. But in any case, which is like the way in which some countries are as well having the extractivism and using by the benefit of themselves, it is not of the benefit from the community or from the environment. It is also progressive politicians or progressive government that are using destructivism to benefit and not to participate into the geopolitical system, but as well to gain profit for it. So that to have in mind. In the next one, we have, thank you, we have an example from the region that I came from, like from Colombia, that maybe if we have time, we can explore because it's a very detailed kind of example. So I will let Jacob continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Gabriela. Thank you. Yeah, just want to share on the environmental impacts of extractivist activities. So I think a lot of these impacts, like they're not new and we are already kind of actively experiencing them. So obviously, like when we clear land and extract minerals, it definitely causes like loss of ecosystems and wildlife. And we also like emit a lot of greenhouse gases. Oops. Yeah. And it causes water pollution, urban pollution, plastic pollution, waste management issues, and so on, especially in the global south. So in so-called quote unquote developing or underdeveloped countries. And I think most importantly, it changes our relationship and bond with the natural world, which is kind of the persistent issue that's underlying many of the crises that we are currently experiencing. And just to share that some scholars have debated whether extractivism should be understood only in terms of natural resources or whether it has already kind of infiltrated into different parts of our lives and society. So in our current world, like it's not just about extracting natural resources, it is the way we holiday, it's the way we acquire knowledge, it's the way we use labor, it's the way we hire people, it's the way we get data, especially in the day of technology and social media and AI as well. The way we get our clothes and the way we get our food. And just to highlight that each of this aspect is deeply connected to the rest as well. Yeah. So actually, just to share how three of us or four of us came about to start this conversation was actually in a classroom where we kind of talked about the ways we acquired knowledge and the ways we were doing research and whether it was extractive or not. So just for everyone to kind of ponder. And this is a diagram to kind of illustrate what we've been sharing. So the roots of extractivism and extractive activities, and how it obviously has led to the current kind of polycrisis that we are experiencing. And so for today, we really want to explore how we can go beyond. I don't think we can solve the crisis, but to at least go beyond the usual extractivist way of living and looking at the world. So this is just a quote from a Japanese Zen master for everyone to just take a pause and just to have a ponder before we move on to the next section. So Zen Master Dogen said that I came to realize clearly that the mind is not other than mountains, rivers, the great white earth, sun, moon, and stars. So maybe just to explore like why nature and kind of being close to nature has always been a very big part of many Buddhist communities and traditions until today. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela and Jacob, and also Elizabeth, and all of you for this opportunity to consider, to reflect on, and to share about this topic, this question, which I feel is possibly the conversation that we all need to be having in this time. It really feels like one that's very close to my heart, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to come into this space that we are creating together. And also I'm feeling inspired just by the asking of this question from this generation upon whom we are placing a great weight in many ways. The task of dealing actually with the results of this extractivist attitude that are playing out in the world today. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope that we can find some interesting perspectives. So I'm going to follow on from this very complete introduction just by highlighting a few points that for me stand out and kind of connect to my own experience of the impact of extractivism, and then the perspectives that I feel that spiritual traditions, including Buddhist understanding, can kind of bring to that and shed a little light. And yeah, first of all, this long history of extractivism, this idea that the earth or nature is somehow a resource, like a mine or a source of endless convenience, as it were, to human beings. And in the West, I think we can, as has been shared, trace this back a long way. But I would say it can go even further back. Actually, in the understanding of some thinkers, we can tie it back to the original dichotomy proposed in certain spiritual traditions, this separation between human beings and the divine, between man and God, if you like to use kind of an old phrasing of that. And we can understand for lots of different historical reasons, including power and hierarchical kind of dynamics, there was a need perhaps for a church, an institution, for power purposes to separate human beings from the divine. And this kind of fallen image of humans as being separate from God kind of also bleeds over, as it were, into this idea of a fallen state for all of material creation, for all of nature itself is somehow no longer divine in that understanding. And we find this expressed in this idea of dominion. These ideas will be familiar for any students of Christian thought. There's this quote from the Bible that we often hear, God said, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over every living creature. So this idea of dominion, while it may have been translated or intended differently at first, it's come to mean this kind of, as it were, license to exploit, to hold dominion over nature. And I think we can also see in this that this removal of the sacredness of nature was actually something that was very old in human traditions. That the pagan traditions of Europe, for example, let alone the indigenous traditions around the world, really held initially this view and goddesses representing both outer phenomena but also inner phenomena. Everything that made up our human experience had, in some sense, a divine aspect. And actually this imbuing of all phenomena with spirit in some way, not just humans, this kind of animism being that spirit which animates the world around us, maybe this was the norm for perhaps tens or even hundreds of thousands of years before the arising of this idea of a split, the difference between the divine and the natural. And this subjugation, I think we can see that that's kind of paved the way for mass exploitation, for later the Industrial Revolution, and this pattern of colonialism that spread out across the globe. But I think it's important to remember that the first place that was colonized in some sense by this idea was Europe, actually. And there is a really touching quote that I've found from one Peter of Duisburg, a priest who traveled into Prussia in the 13th century, so into kind of the frontiers of Europe. And he wrote, "Because they did not know God, therefore, in their error," and he's speaking about the indigenous people of Prussia that they encountered, "they worshipped every creature as divine, namely the sun, moon, and stars, thunder, birds, even four-legged animals, even the toad. They also had forests, fields, and bodies of water, which they held so sacred that they neither chopped wood nor dared to cultivate fields or fish in them." And I'm reminded already of our quote from Dogen Zenji, this idea of the divine, the spirit in all phenomena. It was right there in indigenous Europe before it was overcome by this wave of a dualistic and materialistic thinking. And this idea of the divine everywhere became such an anathema to the church that it was even seen as heretical, this pantheistic idea. Actually, that's the reason, for example, that Baruch Spinoza, the father of Western ethics, was excommunicated from his Jewish community for holding this view of the divine in everything. So this view, it's fundamentally that nature is somehow instrumental, that it's a resource for exploitation, something that we can use to increase our comfort. And it's not even for all humans to do that. It's actually just for those who control the resources. This idea is also inherently unjust in that sense. It's kind of first in, best dressed, as it were. And it has this idea of short-term gain on the throne, discounting long-term cost, and especially the ecological and the social cost, as we can see. And we understand that the foundation for this, the bedrock, is this materialistic and dualistic idea. The external world is different from me and my mind, and that it is somehow not the same as my well-being. Your well-being and mine can be separated. Material world is different from my essence, my soul, and it's also different from the divine. And so we can see, I think, how this plays out in the world today, and maybe just to come out of the more kind of theoretical understanding and a few real-world examples that I have direct experience of. Here in Nepal, where I am currently, I've had the good fortune to work with some local conservation groups and also young ecologists and conservation biologists, really facing the repercussions of this philosophy, this dualistic, materialistic view in the kind of destruction of the support fabric, the ecology of this amazing roof of the world, this Himalayan landscape. So we have a history of subsistence agriculture, harvest of non-timber forest products, especially in the lowlands, the more forested environments of the Terai. and then a shift towards broad-scale multinational agriculture concerns, moving in with genetically modified crops, clear felling of forests, obviously fueled by global trade, but also by an internal climbing demand for modern conveniences, goods and services. This consumption ethic creeping in to what was otherwise a very simple agrarian kind of lifestyle and community. This idea of sacrifice zones, places that we can exploit as long as we preserve other zones, national parks, for example. But in itself, we see this has a kind of a colonialist sort of idea for the local person living there, suddenly finding themselves locked out of a protected area in order to preserve that, while a global corporation exploits their traditional lands in another place. They find themselves caught between the two. The fragmentation of habitat, of course, means that wildlife is threatened, and for example, the world puts pressure on those species, even just through demand, for example, for medicines, like the trade in rhinoceros horn, for example, for its alleged therapeutic benefits. So much so that this separation even means that an individual somewhere in a far-off country can consider their well-being to be more valuable than even the last rhinoceros. For example, in 2010, tragically, the very last Javan rhinoceros was poached from Cat Tien National Park in Vietnam. It was found shot with its horn sawn off for medicine, even though it was the last one in that country. So there is this promise of incorporating the needs and aspirations of local people into our understanding of conservation and how to make that work. But these community forests are also facing pressure because that need for goods and services continues to go up, population continues to climb, smaller and smaller areas of forest, while conserved and with access available for local people. We find them as scenes of wildlife conflict, places where poaching still continues, extraction of timber, consumption of wild animals for food still continues. So even in a community, perhaps we can say, built on a much more holistic and less materialistic or dualistic view of the natural world, can still find itself adopting and coming under the pressures resulting from this extractivist kind of global paradigm, this scenario that we're in. And I'd just like to pause there if there are any questions so far, and also just a time check, because in this section I'd also like to speak a little bit about an Australian example. So how are we going there for understanding and for time?
We're at 2:04 speak. Are we questions of time still?
Okay, great. So yeah, I guess the rhinoceros, or the elephant in the room here, of course, is this scenario that we are facing now of a synergy between this extractivist ideology, if you like, and climate change, which in itself is a result of an extractivist ideology. Yeah, this phenomenon of resource extraction locally, extracting, for example, timber from forests, or mining, or damming rivers to extract water, for example, is just one part of a process of extracting fossilized solar energy and pumping carbon into the atmosphere. We don't need to go into details about the mechanism. But in Australia, we see how this kind of double jeopardy, this synergy between habitat destruction, direct pressures on wildlife population, then is augmented by the pressure of climate change. So the increase in temperatures and in seasonality of temperature especially, and not just temperature but also of rainfall, means that there is a kind of a pervasive and widespread pressure that is piled on top of the pressures from restriction of habitat, for example. And we see this particularly in montane forests because we can sort of watch that process in real time because of the way that altitude mimics latitude, it mimics the temperature gradients that we find across the earth. And there's one phrase, an escalator to extinction, that has been used in regard to this process in Latin America, in the Peruvian Andes. But my doctoral research was on that same phenomena in Australian rainforests, where species that are found nowhere else in the world, like the golden bowerbird or the grey-headed robin, that have existed for literally millions of years in very long-term stable refugia of rainforest, places that stayed cool and moist even during all of the naturally occurring climate changes over the last many millions of years, now facing such a rapid increase in temperature as a result of anthropogenic carbon emissions, that they don't have time to adapt. All they can do is try and shift upslope, tracking the cooler temperatures as they move upslope also. But of course, if you live on a mountain, that area gets smaller and smaller. As you get to the top, eventually, if you're a species that needs a temperature that no longer exists in that environment, you're out of luck. So the extinction threat for endemic species, especially those that can't move quickly or are very, very dependent on stable temperature and moisture, that extinction threat is very, very high, and perhaps even within the next 50 or 100 years, we will see already some extinctions. And indeed, there is already evidence for local extinction, especially of less mobile species in those environments. And not just in Australia, here in the Himalayas, in the Colombian Andes, the same story plays out all over the world. So we see this kind of more diffuse, if you like, and less tangible, until you actually start to really drill down and measure it, effect of an extractivist ideology or philosophy on biodiversity. And this we can kind of frame it in the sense of perhaps a species we never even heard of. But I think in Australia, we are unfortunately among communities in the world that are directly faced with the impact for human communities as well of this extractivist mentality in natural disasters, increase in catastrophic fire risk, floods, heat waves, even cold snaps as we've been experiencing. So there is, I feel, a very kind of a real connection that we can make now. We don't need to be a climate scientist or an ecologist specialized in the habits of rare and obscure frogs or lizards or birds in a far-off mountaintop to see how this concept of my well-being being separate from the well-being of another, or this concept that the earth is somehow a resource that I can exploit for my own satisfaction, is being a very, very short-term and shaky ground on which to build a future. So I feel that there is a lot there. We've opened up a kind of this Pandora's box, if you like, but I also feel, and I think the invitation here in this conversation is to have a look into some of the insights that a Buddhist understanding can bring into the roots of this problem, but also the solutions, because they wouldn't be noble truths if they didn't also indicate a way out. So I might leave it there and just see if there's any questions, if there's something that I need to expand on if we have time, not wanting to kind of rush us or overload us with information either.
Yes, please, particularly Jacob and Gabriela, anyone in the audience, if you've got questions, comments at this point, please feel free.
I think I can go first. Thanks for sharing, Brother Tenzin. Just monitoring the chat while you were sharing and noticing that people from different parts of the world are kind of, really feeling the impacts of extractivism in many different ways. And before we get to the solution, I'm just curious how, because now you're like a Buddhist monastic, and then you used to be an ecologist. I mean, you're kind of both now, right? And how did like Buddhist like kind of philosophies or concepts like help you to like understand like these complex kind of ecological issues?
Indeed. Are there, because this actually will lead us directly into what I will share on it. Are there other questions as well that I can kind of hold in my mind as we go on, so that I can just kind of get a sense of where we're at as a group as well? What might be more interesting for us to explore?
Yeah, so I'm gonna jump. I have a similar question to Jacob, but also you mentioned something about medicine that I am really willing to explore. Like from a Buddhist perspective, how might we rethink medicine not only as a commodity itself, but as well as part of a compassionate relationship with nature and healing? So, how do you see Buddhism contributing to a more ethical approach in medicine in this context? What you were saying.
And we've got one more question from Venerable Vientiane in the audience.
Yeah, Brother Tenzin, thank you very much for your sharing, and I really enjoy the presentation from Gabriela, Jacob, and you. So if we track back from the history, like this tens of thinking, it start like at least 500 years ago. Maybe it deeper from our mind, but like what we can track from document is 500 years ago. This for me is equivalent with 7 generations. So what we have to do is we have to deal with our family, our friends, relative, and ancestor. So how about can you share with us your experience, like when you communicate, like especially for me, my background is Asian, and maybe like our country is on the way to be like the middle income country or like try to develop, and how we can share and not, and how we can control our mind. Like sometimes before I get upset very quick because like to share what my understand and to let to have the consensus from my community. So can you, from the Buddhist perspective, can you help us also? Thank you, Brother Tenzin.
Wow, thank you. These are three very interesting questions. And can I just check in time-wise? How much time should we spend now on this next part of the presentation on kind of Buddhist perspectives particularly? Just so I know when to kind of wrap up and leave plenty of time for discussion, given that this is kind of a dialogue, a conversation as much as a presentation.
10 to 15 minutes.
10 to 15. Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks again for these questions, for the opportunity to share. And certainly for me, coming from an academic and ecological background, I think I was quite soon struck by, even being surrounded by very passionate and knowledgeable colleagues and mentors, how even our deep and sometimes really quite a profound understanding of interconnectivity, ecological systems are very much a way of seeing the world in relationship, in interconnectivity. We have from maybe our earliest kind of like high school biology class, the imagery of ecology is full of flow charts, full of nets and webs and interrelationship. And even with that kind of academic understanding, I think my own experience in academia was one where it was often a highly competitive and a very stressful environment, and one which we were constantly kind of caught between the future, seeking funding, and the past, trying to publish, and often unable really to focus the energy that seemed deserving to the task at hand, which felt very urgent, very real, the destruction of habitats, of the extinction of species. And I started to see also how actually the scientific method itself kind of trying to remove the subject, as it were, from the equation was one that missed a very, very important part of the story. That subject-object dichotomy, we can even say maybe that's more ancient than the self and other, the human, kind of fundamental to the experience of this body-mind, you know, that there is a me here and I experiencing a world out there. And this question eventually led me, I think, to also see that the suffering that I would experience as just a human being, especially, for example, personal loss, death in my family during my PhD thesis, really brought home to me the truth of this suffering of impermanence, that actually all of the things that we hold dear, that which we can accumulate, status or recognition for a publication or something like that, is not something that we can take with us. And this recognition, I think, led me to ask, well, what is more important than that? What is the question that we ought to be asking then? And that led me, eventually, I had the good fortune to meet a meditation teacher who led me towards a different perspective. And for myself, everyone has different causes and conditions, but I was really touched by these stories that we might have thought would be anachronistic, you know, the stories of the life of a human being from more than 2,500 years ago in a different country, a different place and time, a landscape of subsistence farmers and a world away from this fast-paced global economy. But they felt to me still relevant because they pointed towards the heart of this question, the origin of this suffering. And actually, the teachings, as no doubt many of us are familiar, in some ways hinge and stand upon this recognition that we actually are not inhabiting a world made up of separate entities, that this world that we live in is one that's constantly changing, constantly flowing, continuously arising, and also continuously passing, ceasing. Life and death is happening, unfolding around us all the time, and indeed in every moment, not just in one lifetime, but in every moment there is arising and passing. And so this idea, given that, this idea of a separate self and one whose well-being is also separate from that outside, from the natural systems that support me, becomes quite ridiculous when we think about it in that sense. And also something that only ever grows, that never fades or ceases, also becomes very ridiculous. This idea actually underpins the growth capitalist model, right? That we can just get bigger and bigger and have more and more without ever seeing the end of resources. Given impermanence, this idea makes no sense. And so actually this framework, this window, is pointing us towards the idea that our intelligence, our view of the world, is actually founded on a delusion, an illusion, if you like, that we are separate from the world, that we are permanent, and that phenomena are worth holding on to, when in fact this wish for permanence and this idea of separation underlies a kind of a fear and an anxiety about that passing away, that fading away. And this really is the heart of the teachings on Paticca-samutpada, on interdependent co-arising. And we don't have a lot of time to go into much detail here, but we just can maybe touch on a few of the key points from Buddhist understanding that help us to understand or reframe this question of extractivism. One of the most important, hinged on that delusion, is, as already been mentioned, this idea of separation of a separate self and entities out there in the world gives rise to the other two poisons of the three: delusion, craving, and aversion. Grasping onto that which I want, that which is pleasant, and pushing away that which is unpleasant, that which I don't want. And we can see that this is really ancient as well. And we can also maybe see that it's helpful in some situations, that it's actually those instincts that helped our tiny mammalian ancestors, no bigger than a shrew, to survive scurrying in the forest at the feet of dinosaurs, to find a food, find mates, to avoid predators, to survive, reproduce, and eventually give rise to you and me sitting here today. But we can also see that that intelligence has also given us a power to manipulate the environment, the power to change conditions so that we get more and more of what we want and less of what we don't want. So discomfort, hardship, boredom, we try to push those away more and more. We try to get what we think will soothe that anxiety, that fear of fading away. And at the same time, our population, very successful we have been at doing this, our population has grown to the point now where the world can actually no longer support us in our illusion, that we can no longer sustain this illusion of separation, that actually my well-being, my comfort, and your comfort, and the comfort of all beings are interrelated. It's a zero-sum equation, actually. We live on a finite planet. And we have this right from the very earliest teachings of the Buddha. With our mind, we make the world. In the Dhammapada, all our experience is led by the mind, made by the mind. If I act with a mind of anger, of hatred, then suffering will follow as surely as the wheel of the cart follows the footprint of the ox. An image from a subsistence agrarian society, but one that's still directly relevant today. This understanding, of course, these three poisons lies at the heart of the cause of suffering that we understand from the Four Noble Truths. The second, the truth of the cause. But like all good doctors, and this is where we come to this idea of medicine perhaps, the Buddha didn't offer just the diagnosis and the cause of the disease, but he also offered the healthy state that is an alternative, and the path to that healthy state, the medication, if you like. And again, we can't go into a lot of detail, but we can really kind of unpack the Noble Eightfold Path in the Buddhist understanding, this kind of framework for ethical conduct built on a clear seeing of the true nature of the self in the world. Ethical conduct, but also a way of calming these instincts to craving and aversion so that wisdom arises, so that we can actually see more clearly how interrelated we are and start to respond rather than react to those instincts, those impulses when they arise. And I think we can also maybe touch briefly how this understanding, rather than being nihilistic, this kind of invitation to see conditioned experience as suffering, maybe can seem to be saying that that there is no point, everything comes to an end, there is no value in this existence. Rather than that, we can actually see this is not a cold kind of withdrawal, but when handled skillfully, it's actually an invitation to tap into a huge wellspring, a source of motivation, of energy, of courage, and of skills actually to engage with our experience in daily life, but also engage with this polycrisis in a way that is creative, not destructive, a way that is regenerative and not extractive, and in a way that is actually freeing us from those ancestral instincts which we share with perhaps many, many life forms, but which we have the possibility now to also transform, to catch ourselves before we step over the precipice and transform and heal. Again, this kind of medical metaphor, even in the middle of a time of crisis, not waiting for conditions outside to be more conducive, but actually transforming our experience right here in daily life, in the present moment. So again, we can't go into a lot of detail, but there is a lot there in the Noble Eightfold Path for us to draw upon for support. This idea of right livelihood, ways that we can start to limit our direct impact on the earth, ways that we can start to check in with the way that we communicate that can be divisive if it's founded on the idea of separation, but can be inclusive and foster understanding if we are more skillful with our words. This kind of attitude allows us to cultivate a mind that is more calm and free of regret, and one that is conducive to the cultivation of a kind of abiding tranquility, an equanimity, or an acceptance, if you like. One that is able to welcome in all aspects of our our phenomenal experience, the world, inner and outer, not only being calm when things are going well, but also being able to accept difficult experience, painful emotion. unpleasant experience arising both in the mind and also outside in the world. The witnessing of great suffering or disaster, for example. Being able to turn towards that rather than turning away, rather than trying to find a band-aid in consumption, soothing ourselves with some pleasant images from our social media stream, rather than facing the reality that we are living at this point in time. And I think that while we can, I feel, be really inspired to find these invitations right back to the earliest teachings of the Buddha, and indeed I think in all authentic spiritual traditions, this invitation to ethics, to calm and to wisdom is present. But I feel that the Bodhisattva path is one that really brings a very abundant expression to this kind of approach. And I'll just touch very briefly on some of the key ideas there, familiar perhaps to some of us already. But one of them returns us right back to the start, this idea of the divine in everything. Actually, this invitation to view that because of the nature of suchness, all beings have Buddha potential. We actually are fundamentally awakened. Not original sin, but original virtue. Original wisdom, if you like, or primordial wisdom. So we can see how this idea directly invites us to stop when we are considering another being to be something worthy of extraction, or even an inanimate object, but actually to see that because of the nature of interdependence, this too has the potential to be a Buddha. Maybe we can even see that marginalized landscapes or extracted landscapes are in this way also still divine. There's an image from the Avatamsaka Sutra of Indra's net, this vast web of interconnection reflecting all phenomena everywhere. This is kind of a radical view of ecological interconnection, I think. And based on some of these kind of views and perspectives, we are invited as practitioners to tap into a capacity that we have to overcome this deep-seated feeling of separation and the anxiety, the mistrust that brings, this sense of isolation, tapping into instead a wellspring of love, of compassion, and even of joy, of celebration of success in others. And also a warmth and a light that kind of is able to embrace all of our experience, not just that which we feel is beneficial, pushing away that which we feel is not beneficial. We have texts like the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, really powerful expressions of this, the creativity and the abundance of this philosophy, but also I think inviting us to explore some concrete tools. And I'd like to kind of slowly shift towards those concrete tools as we conclude, because I think it's important to make sure that these don't stay as some kind of abstractions or really lofty ideals out of reach of mere mortals, human beings living in this time and place, faced with the difficulties that we have. This is not a kind of a Pollyanna-ish sort of ignoring of reality. It's a love and a compassion that's founded on that insight of interdependence and impermanence, that sees clearly to the heart of things on the basis of that calm and tranquil mind. That what we perceive as this separate self is not separate from the world, from mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, as Dogen and those ancient Prussians observed. That it's not only impermanent as well, this self, but it's also mostly empty space, something that's being confirmed now by quantum physics. And rather than giving rise to a sense of despair, this gives rise to a sense of enormous potential and possibility, and actually can be the cause for a transformation at the base. And in the Yogacara understanding, this washing away of the taints of that delusion, that craving and that aversion, is one that those taints laid down by countless generations. We've already touched on that, and our question about the intergenerationality of these troubles. It's freeing our mind towards a possibility of warm-hearted and flexible relationship instead, to not only other human beings, to our ancestors, but also to all of our experience, living beings, non-living beings included. So this understanding of the mind as being like a storehouse in which seeds of these taints, if you like, delusion, anger, aversion, craving and grasping, are laid down through our experience, but they do not define us. They are not the ultimate nature of the mind. From deep ecology, these ideas have really been taken up, I believe, and we find them in secular understanding as well. Arnie Ness, the author with others, John C., Joanna Macy, recently passed away, and Pat Fleming also wrote a book, Thinking Like a Mountain, inviting us to consider not just this narrow self, but an ecological self. And Arnie Ness himself even was quoted as saying that from this understanding we can see that we need other beings in order to awaken. Actually, our enlightenment, if you like, depends on other beings. And perhaps from this we can give rise to a kind of a reverence and an awe for the natural world and for other living beings. And I think we'll conclude just with some of the kind of key concepts and tools in the Bodhisattva understanding, this path of transformation and healing, if you like, this path towards a transformation at the base, turning this extractivist idea on its head, if you like, are what we call the immeasurable minds. This loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. We've touched on them each already in very brief, but here we can just highlight that the reason they're called the immeasurable is because rather than being instinctively limited to those that we normally would respond to with love and care or compassion, in the Buddhist understanding, these are qualities of heart and mind that we can actually extend outward infinitely, unbounded. We can even extend these attitudes to all of our experience, not just to other beings. And Thich Nhat Hanh, Venerable Zen Master, founder of the Order of Interbeing, also recognized these qualities as being at the heart of the main challenge we have as human beings, just getting along. Ordinarily, our love and compassion is limited to those who we trust instinctively, our family, our friends, those who we know, those who dress the same, speak the same, look the same. But actually, if we limit our love and compassion to those, we isolate ourselves in a world in which we know that our well-being depends on all of us having enough. That if my neighbors suffer, I also will suffer. Joanna Macy also incorporated this practice specifically of Tonglen, of giving and taking, into her teachings in the work that reconnects. She was a tireless activist and a visionary of a post-extractivist world, if you like, trained for many years with Tibetan Buddhists. And this practice really, I do think, turns extractivism on its head. We're invited to see that rather than some kind of exalted state, these, as they are called, divine abodes, they're actually something that we can cultivate directly here and now, because they are also fundamentally human qualities. Again, this non-separation between what is human and what is divine, we have the capacity, if we can value those qualities in another, we have the capacity to give rise to them in our own body and mind. To cultivate those seeds in the store consciousness, if you like, that are beneficial, to selectively water them, allowing the non-beneficial seeds of anger, grasping to subside, bringing into light and fruition these positive seeds of understanding, of connection, of relationship, of kindness, of compassion, of resonating with the suffering of another. So I think I'll leave it there and leave some space for some questions, clarifications, comments, and a bit of a discussion. And hopefully we'll have time to conclude with an actual practice, a short guided meditation of Tonglen, this idea of giving and taking, turning extractivism on its head, taking from others, visualizing actually that I can take from others that which no one wants, suffering, pain, and give in return unconditional love. So hopefully we'll have time to explore some of that. But thank you for your attention. I hope that has been somewhat coherent, and that there are some questions maybe that we can clarify in the next few minutes.
Thank you very much, Brother Tenzin. That was mind expanding, and the sound of the airplanes over was kind of what you're talking about. So before we close the presentation, we will have 15 to 20 minutes of a open discussion with everyone, and then we will finally lead us in a meditation, a compassion meditation as he described. But just to close the presentation, this, because I know that both of you experience and have observed already how different communities are putting this in practice. So both to share any perspectives you would have at this stage.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Tenzin, for the for a really good summary and a really good explanation. So for me, like, I just want to share that it was really during the COVID pandemic that the not just the impacts of extractivism, but like extractivist activities themselves really kind of got exposed. And I remember I was working in a quarantine facility with about, I think, 1,500 migrant workers. So they were mainly from what again we call developing countries, like Burma, India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, etc. And yeah, so we, besides like, COVID and the kind of physical ailments that we were taking care of, one very big thing that stood out was actually like mental health. So we were dealing with a lot of, kind of cabin fever and people. So it was like a factory that was converted into a quarantine facility in like a suburban area. And so it was not meant to be a medical facility. It was just like the loading docks, which is kind of where we saw patients, and we just kind of tried to convert it. And the first few days were okay because people were still kind of not feeling the impact yet. But it was until like about a month where we started getting a lot of kind of mental health issues, and like we had to send a lot of these patients to like psychiatric units and stuff like that. And of course, it was not really on the news, but it was directly, indirectly, like an effect of like needing like a very huge population to sustain this growth in a particular city. And that has always been like the case for like 20-30 years, and no one really questioned that, right, until when something like that happened. So usually before the pandemic, these people were staying in so-called dormitories that were kind of like segregated from the main city. So again, it's like what Brother Tenzin said. It's like my well-being and their well-being, right? So like this is my city, and then that's their living space. They're here to work and build the buildings, and they don't really get to come and really enjoy the facilities of what they've built. Ironically, so that was a really kind of awakening for me because I was in that facility and kind of seeing people dragging their belongings in trash bags and stuff like that. That was quite stark. And and we were talking about health and medicine, right? So like, and you can't remove this from like like the healthcare system and like the medical model and the way we're treating kind of illness and injury. So that was kind of like a major example of like extractivism that I personally witnessed. And and for me, like, I think my time in NTI, the highlight was really re-looking at ethics in general. Well, in our case in NTI, we look at Buddhist ethics, but to me, it was kind of beyond like just Buddhist ethics. And one really key concept that stood out was looking at ethics, which is basically what motivates and what shapes our behavior and actions and policies and stuff like that. Understanding ethics less from a consequential like perspective, where it's like, okay, if I do this, then it's going to harm someone and then I'm going to get punished, or like, I'm going to face these consequences. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, and that's just the very first layer of it. And then we started to kind of explore like approaching ethics from a more embodied and more kind of phenomenological like kind of perspective, where if I can awaken to the interconnectedness of all beings, then naturally, more or less, I would, be a bit more considerate in my actions, and this would encapsulate like, physical harm, verbal, and of course to the environment, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and I think lastly, the key kind of teaching, or rather focus of the Buddhist tradition, which is on impermanence, like what Brother Tenzin said, is really the other side of it, right? That there's this possibility, because if it's not going to be permanent, it can't stay like that forever. But what we do today will definitely, contribute to it worsening or it, improving. Yeah. So I think it's very important to for me to kind of come back to this awareness that things are always changing, and it's in this constant flow, and because of that there's this possibility of change. And it's really important that we dare to dream, basically. Yeah. So that's kind of what I feel. Yeah. To you, Gabriela.
Thank you both for your words. I was thinking. Sorry, do you hear me? Yeah. You hear me? Yeah. I feel like a echo. Anyways, I was thinking in my own like experience, and like there is always in the back of my mind thinking about the injustice as well, because from what I come from, which is Colombia, there is a lot of injustice, not only in the same country, but in a geopolitical manner, in which literally all the other countries that are, I like the concept of minor, like the global minority, because like the people that have the wealthy are precisely the minority, and we as the global majority suffer from decisions that are made, and from extractivism made in a very huge scale. So I'm trying to reconciliate with the idea, and I have been like I've worked with indigenous communities in the government and in NGOs there as well, and it's very hard to understood or reconciliate the idea with Buddhism and not feeling an activist that is full of anger even. And I understand how most of the activists from the indigenous communities that are there act like that, because it's hard to see how the river in which you live, the companies came to dig in, to use your petrol, and then you can access to the water. That the river also means not only the river, but also in a cultural meaning has another sacred space. So yeah, for me it's very interesting how we can see, and my perspective in this. And as well, I think that I will be very happy to understand which is your perspective of this, as like Buddhist as well, like the action that we have to take. For me it's important, and yeah, reconciliating those. And I know that the Eightfold Path gives everything, but in the practice it's not easy. And
Reconcile the anger at injustice with Buddhist activism. I'm going to now unspotlight the speakers and open the floor to an open room discussion, and that perhaps can be sort of the starting question. So directed perhaps at you, Brother Tenzin, and then others just feel free to ask your questions. You can raise your hand again through the React panel at the bottom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and also Gabriela, Jacob, for your sharings. I think this is really a very important question for us to ask and to seek some clarity on, because certainly the invitation through these teachings is not for us to be contented with a change in our philosophy, but actually to seek a change in our behavior. Of course, that we are not just seeking right view in order that we feel better in ourselves, but actually we are seeking some kind of transformation in our way of seeing and knowing that changes the way we act, changes the impact that we have in the world, those inevitable ripples which radiate outwards from every action due to this principle of interdependent co-arising, unavoidably so. Always action will result in reaction, in change, in response in the world. How to act in a way that causes those ripples to be different, causes those ripples to be ripples of benefit rather than of extraction, of injustice. And I think Joanna Macy, as a deep ecologist and as a Buddhist practitioner, Thich Nhat Hanh, so many teachers have pointed us in the direction that seems to be most fruitful, which is this direction of changing, first of all, our own heart and mind, changing our instinct so that when we act, it is not from anger or from hatred, simply repeating the mistakes of past generations. We do not take up the weapon of the enemy, this weapon of separation based on illusion, this weapon of hatred. We take up instead a weapon of inclusivity that accepts this situation as it is, knowing that it too will change, and that our understanding of it is shallow, based on illusion. From that space of tranquility, if you like, and acceptance, able to turn towards that pain and suffering, not turning away from it, but turn towards it with an open heart, but a flexible mind, one that is not caught in that grasping and aversion, but is able to see very clearly the causes and conditions which have given rise to this situation, and to seek not a band-aid medication, not just treating the symptoms, but treat the root cause. And accepting in that, actually the root of equanimity meditation, the object, is a being that is the owner of their own causes and conditions. Accepting that here and now in this body and mind, I am also subject to causes and conditions. There is a limit to what I can physically change in the world. There is a kind of a collective responsibility that I can be part of, but I don't own it in its totality. This is an antidote to the kind of grief and overwhelm, allowing us to kind of recharge in that wisdom and respond in a way that sends out ripples of connection rather than separation, of love and care rather than hatred or fear. So yeah, it sounds, perhaps unreachable in the moment, but these are practices. They're not concepts. These are things that we train the mind in day by day, step by step. And I think all traditions, spiritual traditions, have valued these cultivations in some form and found different ways to bring them into the path, to bring them into fruition in daily life, not just leaving them as kind of a theoretical idea, but something that changes the way we act, something that is fundamentally this kind of ethics based on intention, the intention to bring something more beautiful into the world, a regenerative rather than an extractive intention. I feel that's what arises for me hearing that question. I won't say anything more, opening to the floor. I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom and insight also in this group.
Yeah, any thoughts from people about, the role of activism, or, what is implied through Buddhist perspectives on social engagement? Any thoughts on that? Sometimes Buddhism, and perhaps any spiritual path, tries to bypass the world. Maybe that's not intended in the original teachings, but sometimes that's how it's interpreted. but as Gabriela is pointing to, often many populations on this planet don't have the choice but to resist and respond through action. So something I'm really curious to hear more discussion about. Any thoughts from our contemplative audience today? Helena, good to see you.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I enjoyed that speech. Yeah, I just, what came to mind was that on Monday I went to a Buddhist talk and they talked about metta. And they were talking about how if you were like joining groups like in activism, you were really like attaching to the self because you did that thing with, I like this group because I'm against that. For example, in terms of maybe the Palestine war. So they kind of looked at how that was problematic in a Buddhist view to join one group in terms of activism because then you're not sending metta to the other group. And yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I was thinking of what is the Buddhist kind of philosophy around that. If we join groups and feel attached to it, then is it problematic or? And then my other thought was what Brother Tenzin was talking about. I feel like it's doable for oneself to change those things and maybe small groups, but I feel sometimes I'm trying to come up with a compelling argument for governments to change those things and how it can be compatible with neoliberalism, because I feel like if we could have some draw cards in terms of how this will benefit the governments, how the changes would benefit their ideology, but it's hard to come up with. Yeah, that was my questions to everyone.
Gabriela, do you have any thoughts on the, protests, joining a group?
Oh my God, not me.
You're on the spot.
Okay, yeah, I have some thoughts about it. I just think that I will not talk about it as a Buddhist because I am not like a Buddhist itself, and also I don't know much. So the thing that I know, it's like something very superficial from Brother Tenzin and Bienhen and lots of panels that are here. But what I believe in and the discussions that we have had in classes about specifically this topic, it's about the interdependence as well, and the compassion and the meta. And also in that sense, like there are people that are suffering out there, and there is a genocide that is being like itself, it is something that is there. And so I think that Buddhism as well have an ethical action to do in that way, not only as meditating in metta, which is a lot of wisdom that we have in that, but as well to take the suffering from others, no, which is compassion. And as well in that sense the wisdom could give us a little bit of more understanding towards the problem, because the injustice, the social injustices are there, and maybe it is not about cursing the other or being part of one thing or part of the other, but is identifying the ignorance as well, and what people are are living, like the starving that people are having right now, which I think that we do have to take side, and the side should be precisely the ethical action towards not promote these kind of things. So yeah, I will share that.
But Helena, what you mentioned, it really puts your finger, like if we don't feel that compassion for the other side or whoever's not there in your group, then maybe it becomes a bit problematic from a Buddhist perspective, but perhaps not mutually exclusive of. Jacob, you put your hand up there.
Thank you, guys. That's a great question. Helena, sorry, let me just double confirm. Helena, yes, thank you. Because I come from a country that is on the other side of the spectrum where we have very little freedom of speech and protest. So it's really good question because I've seen like, you know, being in a country where like we can't even, you know, have a peaceful demonstration versus like, you know, living in different countries where that's possible. And of course, I don't, like many of you, I don't have an answer, a clear answer for this. But what really stands out to me, weighing in on, you know, all these issues and especially environmental issues and the urgency of it, and you know, like the different approaches to raising these issues, and like the people that we're working with. So like, you know, the kind of governments or the people in power or the policymakers. So what is really standing out to me is, for me, I'm just trying to find a balance between like intention. So I think the intention of, you know, what is our intention when we go for a march, or what is the intention when we, you know, go for like a rally or like a demonstration. I think that really makes a very key difference in terms of like what we were discussing about like non-self and, you know, attachment to self, attachment to, you know, I guess giving this impression that we are part of something, you know. But then also balancing that with, you know, if you're a person that's directly affected, like what Gabriela shared, right, by, you know, the river pollution, and that, you know, like if you're directly impacted by that, and it's very reasonable to have, you know, strong emotions that arise. So then this is when compassion comes in. Yeah, so I think this is what stands out for me so far, and I'm just trying to see what's the kind of the line, the balancing line between all these different parts. Yeah.
Venerable Vianyan?
Yes, to respond with the question of Helena, I just have some idea. The first thing is the solution is come from our practice, and I remember in Zen, in Plum Village tradition, we have a practice of the five touching of the heart, and I remember the fourth a like I touch the heart, the earth for the one whom I love. And the fifth one is I bow down or I touch the earth for the one who make me suffer. So my response is not like when we act in a group that we go against the other, but every day when I bow down or in front of the Buddha, I put all of my metta down to the earth, and I hope that this will generate a wave or a vibration and touching the heart of the person who go against me or like be my opponent. And someone asked a brother Yatan wants to be the abbot of Deer Park Monastery in US, like whether we need to consider wholesome or unwholesome, good or evil. I invite everyone to find out grounded. Like as a bodhisattva, we not grounded um, uh, in the dualistic view. So like from ourselves, we talk to ourselves, like we will not have attached to the view of like good or bad, wholesome or unwholesome. But for the world of phenomena, we have to take action. So that action is non-action. Like we have to do the work, but like we grounded in non-dualistic view. And the third idea is I'm thankful for Brother Tenzin answer that it's helped me to reflect about what happened in my mind in the past. That maybe when I try to persuade someone, I still have the idea of me, myself, and the other. Like I have my relative or my community, like the someone in my community to persuade. But if I really practice non-self deeply, that what I walk to is the other state of mind. It's exactly when I sit down and do meditation and contemplate. So how I can modify my state of mind or like guide my state of mind is exactly the same when I deal with other people. Like the enemy or the opponent is not the other person, but like how to guide the other state of mind. So in conclusion, if like the other people will ask us about what is the benefit of our movement, I would say because the teaching of Buddhism is embracing, it's not um, to cause the conflict in the community. So at the end, the results of the campaign is to build a healthier and a stronger community with inner strength.
That's very eloquently said. Thank you so much. And in the spirit of embracing, this probably segues nicely to Brother Tenzin and the guided meditation that you've described.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you, Venerable Vian Hien, Gabriela, Jacob, Helena, all of you. Just to check in, how much time do we have for this guided meditation, just so we can kind of pace ourselves?
Maybe 4 minutes?
Oh, wow. Okay, so yeah, I think there's some really important points that we've covered here, and I would really like us to kind of come back to the heart of things as we conclude, recognizing that actually this practice of cultivating a boundless heart mind of love and compassion is one that exactly targets this tendency that we have, even as we identify someone dear to us, a natural object for our love and compassion. By implication, we identify the other. We identify that being who is not included in our habitual circle of love. And here we are working towards seeing actually that non-separation, actually neurochemically, in terms of our physiology, we are working with that habit of identifying the in-group and the out-group, and actually making that in-group so big that it includes everyone. So I invite you to find a comfortable sitting position, perhaps taking a few moments just to establish yourself in connection with this miraculous earth beneath us, this great mother Gaia supporting us as she turns in space, protected by this thin film of atmosphere which we can connect with directly, breathing in and out. You might like to close your eyes if it's comfortable to do so. Connecting with that feeling of breath in the body. Setting aside thoughts of past and future, perhaps feelings arising in the mind as well, some responses or reactions to something shared, thoughts and images perhaps of difficulty and suffering manifesting in the world. Recollecting awareness, drawing it back to the body, away from sounds in the space that we are in perhaps, away from feelings on the surface of the body, finding that sensation of breath inside the body. And I'll invite 3 sounds of the bell. We'll enjoy a brief guided meditation, giving and taking, loving kindness and compassion combined. Breathing in, aware of the in-breath, riding those sensations of the breath as they descend, expansion of the upper chest, the rise of the belly perhaps, allowing that gift of life-giving oxygen to penetrate to every cell and tissue in the body. And as we breathe out, bringing awareness to the heart space, the sensations that we find in the region of the heart just as they are. Relaxing as we do so the whole body, tracking those sensations in the heart space. Knowing that we can always in this practice come back to these sensations just as we find them. This is our anchor, our safe harbor, breath in the body. Relaxing, letting go. But perhaps inspired by what we have been hearing, seeing the potential in this body and mind to respond rather than react to the situation we see in the world today, giving rise to a mental image in the space in front of ourselves of one of these situations of difficulty in the world. Perhaps not the most difficult situation we can imagine, perhaps something we have read about or heard about in the news, or perhaps a situation in our own life that is troubling, a situation of difficulty, perhaps of sadness, of anger. Perhaps it is even a sensation, a part of our own body, a place where we feel pain, discomfort. Tracking sensation in the heart space as we do so, perhaps feeling a subtle change there, perhaps a trembling or an awakening to that difficulty, this opening of the heart, turning towards difficulty. Breathing in, allowing that image to clarify and also that feeling in the body and mind to become more vivid. And breathing out, relaxing the whole body at the same time as giving rise to a lotus of compassion. First of all, from a seed arising in the belly, imagining a shoot emerging from that ocean of energy there, climbing slowly towards the light until it is able to open petal by petal in the heart space. Perhaps as we breathe in and out, tracking a change in feelings in the heart as this image of the lotus clarifies. Perhaps it is white and radiant, perhaps a warmth or spaciousness there. With its roots extending down into this understanding of pain and difficulty in the world, this blooming lotus rises through the water to the light, opening towards that difficulty, seeing clearly its origins in the illusion of separation. This lotus, guided by in-breath and out-breath, is able to draw in towards itself that pain and difficulty, whether in our own body, in our own life, or somewhere in the world. Perhaps visualizing it even as like a dark liquid or a smoke. Using our imagination to change our reaction to that suffering, turning towards it, inviting it into this lotus in the heart space, which has this power to transform. And as we breathe out, sending back not pain and suffering, but love and kindness, this embrace of light and warmth, of care, friendliness, compassion. Breath by breath, allowing that being or that time and place or that part of the body to be healed, refreshed, protected by this radiance of light and warmth from the heart. Visualizing the effect that it has on that being or that place, the ease that they feel in body and mind, perhaps the calmness of their expression or a smile on their lips. Perhaps it is our own selves that we visualize in this state of ease and safety, directly sharing in this benefit, not an abstraction, but a reality in our own body and mind. As breath by breath we allow that image to clarify, that feeling to deepen in the heart space. Breathing in, taking that which is difficult and painful, transforming it in the heart space, in that in-between breath, and breathing out the warmth and light of kindness and care. And as we conclude, I invite you to explore breath by breath the possibility to allow this feeling to spread outwards from the heart space, out into the body, part by part, into the shoulders, arms and hands, into the head and neck, the chest and the belly, the hips, the legs left and right. Aware of the whole body from the tips of the toes to the crown of the head and the tips of the fingers, infused with that light and warmth of loving kindness and care. Resting in that awareness, and perhaps if it makes sense to do so, exploring possibility, inviting that love and kindness, that compassion and care to extend beyond the body, even out into the space in which you sit, into your neighborhood or landscape, your country, or even the whole planet, beyond the horizon, in all directions, above, below, across, without obstruction. No room for anger, for hatred. This radiance of light and warmth of loving kindness encountering many beings, some suffering deeply, extending like an umbrella, a protection over all beings everywhere. Trembling with that suffering in our compassion, but knowing there is a way out, this wisdom and insight of into being, this too will change, arises due to causes and conditions. The medicine for this illness is love and compassion, able to transform even the seeds of anger and hatred laid down by previous generations, watering instead the seed of love and allowing that to ripple out from this present moment in all of its limitless potential, if only we are able to see clearly, to respond with love and care rather than reacting in anger or hatred. Allowing this light and warmth of loving kindness to spread, to soothe suffering wherever it manifests, relaxing the whole body, letting go of our attachment to habitual patterns of reaction, breaking the barriers between this heart and that of the other.
Minutes.
Thank you very much, dear friends, for this opportunity to share, to be part of this very nourishing discussion. I hope what I have shared has been helpful, and though necessarily quite brief, this practice at the end, perhaps a taste of how we can bring some of these insights and practices that have been shared into our daily life, step by step, cultivating this capacity to engage, to turn extractivism on its head perhaps, and cultivate a regenerative relationship with our experience and with the world. So in a moment I'll pass back to you, Elizabeth, maybe to conclude, to Jacob and Gabriela. Once again, many thanks. But just to say also, if you're interested to follow up, please feel free to contact me, and I may be able to share our project, as Elizabeth mentioned, in the Dorrigo Plateau area, to do just that, to create a space for regenerative practice in this time of polycrisis, a refuge for biodiversity, but also for human beings. So thanks again. Back to you, Elizabeth, Jacob, Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Brother Tenzin. If people Google Gaia Forest, New South Wales, I believe they'll find the website. You can also put it in the chat there. So thank you all very much, especially to Brother Tenzin, Gabriela, Jacob, and to everybody who participated. There's certainly a lot of food for thought and a lot of inspiration for us to carry forward. And if I can hold your attention for one more quick second, our next conversation is on the 20th of August on near-death experiences, on the growing scientific recognition and ancient and modern perspectives of it. And we also have a few full-time and full and partial scholarships for subjects in mental health program and health and social well-being program here at Nantian Institute. So if you're interested, you can contact scholarships at nantian.edu.au. All right, thank you for your attention, and we wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for being here. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.